Thanks, Pastor Chaz. Morning, everyone. You all look, I think, pretty reasonably awake. I'll see if I can do something about that. I want to just touch on this subject in a bit of I guess, a simple overview, because there is a lot that could be said on the topic. And I don't mean from a political point of view, because I'm no politician, I'm no expert in politics. I don't know if there's anybody here that likes to think they're an expert in politics. Maybe we've got a lot of average people who would give it a go, but what we're enjoying doing here in our fellowship is actually finding out what the Bible says on the topic. And we can all read our Bibles. We've got access to what God has said on this subject. Many people bypass Israel in their everyday life. It does hit our news occasionally, but the local news doesn't give it much. It's more interesting to find out what's going on with our football team or what's going on with the Olympics than to be worried about the bigger issues of life. And it's nice to be in Australia, far from the madding crowd, although it's getting closer to us in every way. But we can't ignore the fact that there is going to be a connection with the whole of the world with what happens with Israel. We can't get away from that factor. So we can see there a couple of symbols which are very well known to people. The Israel flag is probably one of the better known flags around the world for anybody who's watched the news at any time. The Dome of the Rock there with the golden outer surface is a very well-known place as well, a great place of conflict. So I just want to, like I say, go through a bit of a simple overview, and I was hoping to use some Bible verses that I haven't got written up on the screen. And so if you've not got a Bible, or if you have got a Bible, use it. If you've got a phone that you can use, I do want to let you have a look in your own Bibles a little bit, so as we work through this. So this is the sort of thing we're seeing on the news. And we see on the right there the map of Israel, and there are three particularly troubled areas from time to time. Up in the north we see the Golan Heights there, bordering Syria and Lebanon. Then coming down we see the West Bank in the centre of Israel, bordering on Jordan and the River Jordan. And then across to the left there we see the Gaza Strip, which borders on Egypt and the Sinai. And the Gaza Strip is the current point of great contention, and we've seen many of these shots and videos of the terrible things that are happening in that area. And like I say, I'm not going to go into the details of all of that, but that is what's drawing people's attention at the moment. We're really going to go through a series of maps here today, and this is a map of what was called the Fertile Crescent, and it's believed this is where things began as far as Adam and Eve. Some would say all of creation, but that's another topic. So if you recognise that map and what's what, got the Mediterranean Sea across to the left, and then the Red Sea down lower, and across to the right the Persian Gulf, you'll probably see this area on a number of the maps. In that little purple region there, the city of is mentioned, spelt U-R, and that's where Abraham comes from, and we're going to just have a look at him for a moment and see how he plays a part in all of this. So again, that's a similar map, and we've got on the left there the Mediterranean Sea, and then if you look down in the bottom right hand corner, perhaps I should use my pointer, we've got there the city of And we've got Abraham's trek here as he moved out of the region, and God called him, and he called him to come down into this region here, which was at that time what we now call Israel. It was called the land of Canaan. Now, I'd like to just look at Genesis 12 just to confirm what we're saying here. Many of us will know these scriptures, but if you're new here today, it might be worth you having a little look. So in verse 1 of Genesis 12, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. So just pointing that out again, there's Haran that we've just read about, and he's called from there to come down here into the land of Canaan, which is where he heads to. And there's a fair bit more to the story, but we won't go into all the details of Abraham's comings and goings for the purposes of these slides here today. Now, eventually we find that Abraham's descendants, Isaac, his son, and then Jacob, his grandson. Jacob had quite a number of children, 12 in fact, and Joseph, one of his sons, was a favourite of Jacob's, and he made him a coat of many colours, and we see that picture up the top there where Joseph is harassed by his brothers, and he's sold off into slavery, and he's taken to Egypt. And as God would have it, God used this as part of his plan. And across to the right there we see the picture of where Joseph eventually becomes second in command in the land of Egypt, and eventually his brothers come there because of the famine that is in the land of Canaan, and they need him, they need what he can do for them, and they then settle there, and their father Jacob comes and joins them. And so this becomes a period of, I guess, the family history, if I can put it that way, where they end up growing in number in Egypt now and not in Canaan. They've moved on to the land of Egypt. Eventually, the Pharaoh in charge, he passes on, another one comes in charge, and he doesn't have a good view towards this growing family of Abraham. And so they end up slaves, as we see here in the bottom left-hand corner, and they start to call out to God for help, the God of Abraham and of his son Isaac and of his son Jacob, and they appeal to him to set them free. And then God calls Moses to lead them out, and eventually as they go out through the Red Sea, we find here that there's spies that go into the promised land, which is Canaan, where Abraham has come from, and they go back there and they find out how good it is to be there. Unfortunately, it takes them 40 years to get there because of their own disobedience to God, but we do find that Joshua and Caleb, with a vast number of people, end up going and settling in the land of Canaan. This then becomes a kingdom, and what was promised to Abraham starts to grow in this area. And the first king there is Saul, and then along comes David. And David, you can perhaps see some of the markings there in the colouring. In red, the territory of Israel before David became king. and then the area conquered by David and inherited by Solomon, and then the area under strong economic influence of Solomon. So it grows and it goes into these regions that we recognise the shape of when we look at Israel today. Let's just go to a couple of scriptures about this. 2 Samuel and chapter 5. And just reading here in verse might start in verse 3. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem. Now it just tells us about how he gets into Jerusalem. The king and his son went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, which spake unto David, saying, Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither, thinking David cannot come in hither. So they were goading him. There's no way you'll get in here. The blind and the lame would manage to resist you. In verse 7, Nevertheless David took the stronghold of Zion, another name for Jerusalem. The same is the city of David. And David said on that day, Whosoever getteth up to the gutter and smiteth the Jebusites and the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, The blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So David dwelt in the fort and called it the city of David, and David built round about from Millo and inward. And it says, And David went on and grew great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. So the enemies here, all of them, as it's described, were all destroyed. And David came in, and he took Jerusalem, and he made it the place, the head of his kingdom. I was also going to look in another spot. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 4. And in verse 25, And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So this is what the land became to them, a place of safety. It was the promise that had been given to Abraham that they would inherit this land. And we might just take little notes here about that they dwelt every man under his vine and under his fig tree. I want to come back to that a little bit later. I might just also touch on Deuteronomy chapter 7. And in verse 7, The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, has the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand from Egypt, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keepeth his commandments to 1,000 generations. So he says to Israel, it's not because you were so good, you were just small, but I loved Abraham, I loved Isaac, I loved Jacob, and I promise this to you, and I promise this to you for 1,000 generations. This promise is not going to go away of what I have said. So just moving on, what happens eventually is that Israel becomes disobedient to God. For all the good that he gave them, for all that he rescued them out of Egypt and set them up in a beautiful country, eventually they turned away from God, and they looked after other gods, and they, I guess, adulterated themselves is probably the way of putting it, before God. And so the Lord allowed it for other nations to come and, I guess, tread all over them. And there are some nations in the world that seem to be a bit of a highway for enemies to come through. And Israel is maybe one of the greatest that's ever suffered that. And so the Assyrian Empire, which was a vicious empire, anybody's ever looked into the history of it, they were shockers. They came and dominated the region, and you can see where they have travelled. And they came down to Israel about 722 BC, and a bit before our time, but we're relying on the historians on that one. And I might just show another map. This too is a picture of the Assyrian Empire, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that on this one, that there's a little spot here called Judah, and it actually wasn't conquered, this little part here, and Jerusalem in particular. And those who have read the story about Hezekiah, that he sought the Lord, one of the kings of Judah, he sought the Lord, and the Lord protected him in Jerusalem, and the Assyrians came down, and they came all around them and took 10 of the 12 tribes, and they even took of the other 2 tribes and took them away to Assyria, never to come back. This was to destroy the occupation of these people in this country. And it was very effective, but the Bible speaks of a remnant. There was a remnant that was left. And so it's quite I guess this is a little picture of where Israel has remained as the years have gone on, about this remnant. So later the Babylonians came, and they took over from the Assyrians, as happens with empires. Eventually somebody wants to beat you. So the Babylonians came, and again they trod all over Israel as well as other countries in the region. But they took, when they came in from Babylon, 604 BC, we find that the king of Babylon took everybody that was of some importance. I think a few people were left there in the region. And later, 70 years later, we find that there was a crew that came from Babylon, and they came back to try to re-establish Jerusalem and to rebuild it. And it took quite some time for this to happen, but here they are trying to resurrect their history out of the dust. And they do, and they rebuild it, and they rebuild it over a period of time with a number of kings having to give them permission, and they get opposition, people trying to stop them from rebuilding. Again, very unique stories, all in their own. Eventually the Persians come along, the Medes and the Persians, in fact. This is the time of Esther the queen, and would have been a very interesting time for her. And so the domination continues of the land of Canaan, or the land of Israel. Then comes along Alexander the Great, and with great speed goes through the whole region, taking over one place after another from the Persians. And he very much delighted in being able to stand up to them. He was outnumbered at a key battle, and he didn't want to take them at night. He wanted to face them in the day, and the sheer courage and determination of Alexander the Great overcame the huge Persian Empire. And he too came and controlled the area. Then along come the Romans. and away they go with this huge empire that surrounds the Mediterranean. And but of course, there it is, it's controlling Judea as well. And this, of course, is the time of Jesus. And so they come down into the region about 63 BC, and when Jesus arrives on the scene, we know it's under Roman occupation, and that's what we read of in the scriptures. And so the domination continues, and God had said, "I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you." Now, there was going to be a time when this changed, but it didn't seem incredibly apparent at this time, because the Lord said he was actually going to punish them for a long period. In fact, that period we could discuss on another occasion, but it was a period the Bible talks about as 7 times, and it's 7 times 360. Again, another subject, but it amounts to 2,520 years of punishment. So it's nation after nation after nation after nation. And their whole history then is one of domination, as they're handing their conversations down to their children and to their children's children. In 70 AD, Rome sacks Jerusalem. Titus comes along, and we can see there in that engraving that they're carrying away from the temple the spoils of the temple with the 7 golden candlesticks, and they are just completely ruining what had been rebuilt of Jerusalem, and so once again Jerusalem is done for, and the land. But then along comes the Ottoman Empire. They want to have a go at as well, and we see how that empire grew. And of course there were a lot of battles between England and the Ottomans, and there was the Holy Wars that went on, and so it just continues on right through this period, and we find that it goes right up until the First World War. There is control there, and eventually in the First World War, big changes start to come into place. And General Allenby, with the British forces, Commonwealth forces really, enters into Jerusalem in 1917. He takes it without a shot being fired, and a lot of the original Jerusalem is, well, the original Jerusalem's not there. It's been rebuilt, and there are still bits and pieces that are hard to find of the original. They're still excavating these days to find out parts of the original Jerusalem. But General Allenby comes in, and all of a sudden there is a mandate to find a home, which has been delivered by the United Nations, to find a home for the Jewish people. Now, this is an outstanding turn of events, that these people, after such a long period of time of domination, should be given this approval to set up a homeland. The date of 1917 is particularly important. It's 2,520 years from 604 BC, a very important calculation, subject for another day. So the land at the top there, it says 1922, the final territory assigned to the Jewish national home. And there was a talk of, you'll see in the middle there, whoops, that's not the right one, that one, Transjordan there. This area here was even being considered as part of the homeland, but in the end, the homeland has been defined as just this area through here that we know. There's the Golan Heights again, and the Gaza Strip is down here, the West Bank is across here. This is what was now to be determined as borders would be kept for the Jewish people to have a homeland. Now, Second World War comes along, and I want to just mention this because we're going to see this in a scripture shortly, but there are some very big events that start to happen in our time that are all relevant to what goes on about the promises regarding Israel. And we'll look at some more scriptures in a moment, but I just thought we should just toss this one in about the Second World War and what happened there. Similar time, we find that because of this mandate for a homeland for the Jewish people, after the Holocaust in the Second World War, we find people are travelling back, 1947, into Israel in number from Europe and trying to get in. There was a lot of conflict with the British, who were in charge at the time, and there was ships that were turned away. It was a lot of bad press for the British at the time, but eventually more and more people who had been dispersed started to find their way back into the land of Israel because they heard it's going to be our home. Again, a very unique situation. 1947 across to the left. Well, I might just read what's written on the right there, I don't know if you can see it, but these three maps show how Israel went from not existing to, in 1947 and 48, establishing its national borders. It's hard to identify a single clearest start point to the Israel-Palestine conflict, but the map on the left might be it. These are the borders that the United Nations demarcated in 1947 for a Jewish state and an Arab state in what had been British-controlled territory. The Palestinians fought the deal, and in 1948 the Arab states of Egypt, Jordan, Iraq and Syria invaded. The middle map shows in green how far they pushed back the Jewish armies. The right-hand map shows how the war ended with an Israeli counterattack that pushed into the Orange Territory, and with Israel claiming that as its new national borders. The green is what was left for Palestinians. So, you might just take that in for a moment. So, the partition plan here on the left, which doesn't probably give as much as Israel would have liked. Here's the Gaza Strip. This is a whole lot more than the West Bank here, and this other area up here. So then we've got the invasion in that middle map, and armies coming in from all these countries, and Israel repelled them. And now there's the Gaza Strip, there's the West Bank, and eventually they've also got the Golan Heights. So in 1948, I'll just say, I haven't got a slide on it, but it was declared as the State of Israel. And in 1967, the Six-Day War came about. Again, Israel was attacked, and the two maps there show us a bit about what happened and how they managed to get control. So here's Gaza. They didn't have they didn't have control there. They didn't have control of the West Bank. After the battle, they've got the West Bank, they've got Gaza, they've got the Golan Heights, they've even got the Sinai, which they gave back later. But one thing that was very important in this is that you see Jerusalem here is just on that border between the two. Now Jerusalem they have got as part of the West Bank. They've got the wall of the old temple, and the Wailing Wall as it's known. And you see here the festivities of the people, how delighted they are that they've managed to reclaim that particular part of Jerusalem. Now, just to give a bit of a picture of how not surrounded by friends they are, so tiny little Israel against all the odds exists. Now, if all of the force of those countries was united, they would obliterate them in a heartbeat. But the Lord made a promise to Abraham, and he said it would stand for 1,000 generations. And he said, I didn't choose you because you were big and powerful. So it's going to be God's hand that keeps this nation in place, no matter who might come against them. and because it's a promise of God. Countries which recognise Israel, Palestine, or both. So the little code on the left says in the dark blue is those who recognise only Israel. In the light blue, recognition of Israel with some relations with Palestine. So we find there that we've got North America in that case. We've got, I'll pick the main regions, a fair bit of Europe, Australia, and there's a few other spots over here, over there, Japan as well. Then recognition of both Israel and Palestine is the grey, so that's quite a lot. Recognition of Palestine with some relations to Israel in the light green, and in the dark green, recognition of only Palestine. Here we go again, this same region. They want Israel out, completely destroyed. Now, Israel has been destroyed, as if we've seen, many, many times, with only a remnant remaining. And the rest of Israel are elsewhere. That's a subject for another day, about how they've ended up in the Commonwealth and in the United States. And so it's no surprise that those who align with Israel are the Commonwealth and the United States in particular. No surprise. But Israel itself, that land, is just a remnant of the people, but the land is held secure, as was promised. Let's just turn to some scriptures. Luke. Just want to concentrate a little bit on Luke 21. Luke 21 verse 5. And as some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, Jesus said, As for these things which ye behold, the days will come in the which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what shall there be? What sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? In the book of Matthew, they speak, their question is the signs of the end of the age. But I want to use Luke particularly for some other reasons. In verse 8, and he said, Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near, go ye not therefore after them. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then said he to them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in different places, and famines, and pestilence, and COVID-19, etc. And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. And if we go down a little bit further to verse 20, and when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Now that's happened time and again. So Jesus here is speaking in 33 AD, 38, anyway, somewhere around there. And he's speaking of something which lies ahead. And in verse 21, he says, Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Now, what he's speaking of here is what we saw before when the Romans in 70 AD came and they completely destroyed Jerusalem. So he's forewarning them of this particular destruction by the Romans. But then he goes on, and in verse 24, he says, And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now the Gentiles was just a name for foreign nations, anybody that was not Israel. And so he speaks here that of Jerusalem trodden down by foreign nation, by that the atomic bomb gets dropped And we read in verse 26, men's hearts fail them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And there's more about this in the Old Testament. It talks about the disease where people's their eyes will consume away their sockets, their skin will fall from them, and it's a description of nuclear war. And so it is here, this description of this time that we're living in. And verse 27 says, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Now, there's a lot of time that's packed into a few verses here. We've got what happened in Rome, and we took 70 AD, but we're also talking 1917, 1948, 1967, 2017. What happens? Jerusalem is recognised as the capital again of Israel. All of these things coming to pass. And in verse 29, I just want to finish with some thoughts around this. And he spake to them a parable, behold the fig tree. Remember, in Judah and Israel's days of safety, every man sat under his vine and under his fig tree. A description of Israel. There's many descriptions of Israel this way. We might just, if you keep your finger, you can't do this on your phone. Go back to Hosea chapter 9 for a moment. And in verse 10, I found Israel, this is God speaking, like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time. This is how God had this view. Now, I'm a lover of figs. I didn't know figs when I was a kid, but we've got a beautiful fig tree in our backyard, and I love them. They're a very good, healthy fruit. And when God saw Abraham and what he was going to do, he sees this fig tree, the fathers of Israel. He sees this fig tree. But it goes on, it says, but they went to Baal Peor, to another god, and separated themselves unto that shame, and their abominations were according as they loved. And so the fig tree got damaged, and they went sour, they went bad. There's more I could read. Jeremiah, we might just touch on, Jeremiah chapter 8. And in verse 5, why then is this people of Jerusalem slitten back by perpetual backsliding? They hold fast deceit, they refuse to return. Then we'll go down to verse 12. Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush. Therefore shall they fall among them that fall in the time of their visitation. They shall be cast down, saith the Lord. I will surely consume them, saith the Lord. There shall be no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree, and the leaf shall fade, and the things that I have given them shall pass away from them. And that's what he did with all the nations coming through. He said, I will take away the glory of this fig tree and destroy it. And we know the story that when he comes himself, when Jesus walks and he sees the fig tree and there's no fruit on it, and he curses it. And he's talking about Israel. Israel that had turned from him. And he cursed it. But when the disciples noted his cursing, he said to them, have faith. And he pointed them to a new direction of how the fig tree would come again, and that it would sprout forth. And it would come in people being born again, becoming part of the church. God's new people now, ruling with God, is new Israel, as it were, people who were in the church. And so we go back to Luke chapter 22. I'll give you a chance to flick across to that one. And verse 29. And he spake to them a parable, behold the fig tree and all the trees. And when they now shoot forth, you see and know of yourselves that summer is now nigh at hand. So likewise you, when you see these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. And so there's perhaps two ways of looking at this, is that the two signs, I guess. On the one hand, we see that the things that the Lord has said about troubles upon the world would be an indication of this time coming, of Jesus coming back. There's another part to the promise, or to the identification, and that's of this church rising up, as it were, out of the ashes, and people being spirit-filled, and this growth, these leaves and fruit that comes at this time. And the Lord brings the power back. And so all of a sudden we find ourselves looking at this like, is this our time? Are we ready for this time? So people sort of think, well, okay, Israel. Has it got anything to do with anything? Or we look at a country that has been so demolished so many times and then raised up, surrounded by all of its enemies, and God said, I promised that to Abraham. But he also made a bigger promise. And that was the promise of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ would come, his Son, he would die for the world, and he would be raised from the dead. And again, an amazing event. And when he is raised from the dead, he pours out the Holy Spirit upon the waiting disciples. Another amazing event. And this tree, this new tree, the church, starts to flourish. And here we are, a part of that, and inviting anybody else that wants to come and be a part of it before it's too late. Because the battle against Jerusalem is not finished. No way is it finished. The nations still want to destroy it. But we're getting a lot of effects here today. But we've got it out. And we're safe. Doesn't matter what the world does. Jerusalem shall be a burdensome stone to those who will be troubled by it. Says it will be a cup of trembling to the nations round about. People can look at the Olympics as much as they like. They can look at their footy team, or maybe they're sad about that one too. But Israel, it keeps coming into the news because God's trying to remind us. Jesus is coming back, and it says he's going to plant his feet on the Mount of Olives at Jerusalem. And he's going to be there with anybody who believes this and takes hold of it. Amen. Leave it there.